Okay, Trevor, we are back at the Beat the Odds podcast, and so I'm back in the office.
Yeah, back in the office, back from Dubai. How was it, man? Tell me.
It was great. It's great. But you come back here, and it's kind of funny because people think that there's a heat wave going to kill humanity because it touched 35 degrees here. And I try to tell them, I was like, man, it didn't touch 35 degrees in the middle of the night in Dubai in the summer. It's like it never got down to 35. Right. 35 is chilly. So it's just a little different on perspective. But yeah, it was a good trip. Got our corporation set up in Dubai. Got all the paperwork filed, and so that's all done. And onwards and upwards, I guess, right?
Yeah, that's great. And then we can start thinking about, having staff go over there and hiring people and getting them situated in the UAE. And, bottom line, I mean, it's cheaper labor. We can get them there, and it's a better quality of life than in a lot of places where they come from.
That's right. Yeah. So it's a good idea for our back office, right? So. But yeah, I'm excited to be back here, and we're talking about Canada. Is Canada energy superpower? Right?
Is Canada energy superpower? Well, for me, I think that we are or could be an energy superpower. But I guess we'll have a good discussion about what we think about that.
Yeah, but I guess we're forgetting one thing.
What
that happened after we chat last Friday? We almost woke up in a different world. Someone just turned their head a little bit, and the world as we know it kind of was a little bit
disrupted,
a little bit different. So I know
So keep your head on a swivel, folks.
That's right.
You never
if you turn
know.
your head a lot, you might avoid something bad coming for you. Right? I was on the plane, and I was asleep. Right, so I woke up 5 hours after the assassination attempt happened. And of course, I woke up, and then I buy the internet on the plane, and I think Air Canada actually has an internet that works now. So they have like two options. One's like the streaming option, and one's the ultimate option. It's like definitely pay the extra $1 for the ultimate option, because this is the first time on an Air Canada flight where the internet actually worked, where I'm not just like waiting for Twitter or something to load to read something. And it's like, and when I loaded, I was like, holy smokes, because it was like 5 hours after it happened. So there was, a ton of info posted on it already, right?
Oh, man. I am constantly looking at the Twitter feed, and every day there's something, almost minute by minute, there's some new information coming out, inside job, this was a setup, and look at this company, they've, shorted Donald Trump's stock by like 34 million shares and all this stuff the day before the assassination attempt. It's just like, man, something's up there.
It's just so wild.
In my opinion, something is up there.
It's just so wild. Like I think, I saw Joe Rogan trying to, summarize it, right? And it's like, I think he did it really well. It's just like, it just seems like we're living in a simulation, right? It's just,
you and I were saying yesterday, it's like we're living real time in a movie. Like, you couldn't write a plot better than what we're seeing unfold in this U.S. election cycle.
Yeah, crazy. But let's drill into the topic of the day. Is Canada an energy superpower? So,
all right.
I post this. The global energy consumption by source, because I don't think most people understand where the energy we use comes from. Mm-hmm. And the common misconception is people conflate energy with electricity, but electricity is just one way we use energy. Normally, energy is derived from burning some sort of fuel, okay? Whether it's, gasoline or diesel or natural gas, or, that's where most of the energy comes from. And the primary sources of energy, whether we like it or not, still comes from oil. 31% of the world's energy is still derived from oil, 27% from coal. That's, even when I pulled it up, it's still a little bit shocking to me, like how big it is. But people have to understand, for perspective, it's like coal is still used to generate a lot of electricity in the world, not just in North America, like globally, worldwide, right? So
yeah, absolutely. Coal is abundant. Like, we have abundance of coal seams throughout Canada and really the world. Like, coal is a major fuel source, and because it burns dirtier. Okay, let's say that's true. I'm sure there's ways to, use air scrubbers and whatnot to keep the pollution down.
Yeah.
But, these people who claim to say that, oh, I'm not going to support an oil company or an energy company because I don't believe in that. I believe in, saving the planet and so forth. But if they just realize that having abundant, cheap energy that's derived from oil and natural gas, it allows people to save and help the environment a lot easier than if they're having to go out and chop down trees and burn dung and tires and whatever to create heat or to cook their food.
They call it biofuel now.
Oh,
biofuel.
Biofuel.
Yeah, biofuel. It's like it's something new. It's like you're burning trees, people. Like it's burning trees. Like it's going backwards in time, not going forwards in time, right? And so they tried it. So it's kind of funny when they, you can make it a pellet all you want, but primarily it's burning trees, most of biofuel.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
In natural gas, just 24.7%, hydro 6.9%, and hydro's a tricky thing because hydro's not portable. The electricity can only be transmitted so far through power lines. You can have an abundant hydro source, but if the people aren't relatively close to the hydro source, it doesn't really matter, right? Nuclear 4.3, others 5.7. All of the others. Solar, wind, biofuel, that's in that 5%. So it's just not ready for prime time yet, right? So whether someone wants to switch or not, they have to realize the logistical constraints behind it. It's like that's something that would take decades, not years. It would take decades, whether they believe it should be done or shouldn't be done. Is like if they wanted to do it, they have to recognize it has to be there. It would take decades to do. So.
And trillions of dollars.
Trillions
of dollars. Like
trillies.
Not just, trillies.
Trillies. Right?
It's just a trillion.
And some people recognize it. You see it in the comments. It's like, and we think driving some EVs will save the planet. It's like, yeah, some people don't realize sometimes that they're buying an EV and plugging it in to an outlet that's deriving their power from coal. that happens, right? That happens. Somewhere out there's someone who thinks that they're saving the globe, and they're plugging their EV into their home charger, and that home charger is hooked up to a coal power plant, right?
Yeah, I find it so hypocritical that you go to you see these charging stations when you're driving through BC or whatever, and what is powering those Tesla charging stations? There's usually a diesel generator sitting right there that's going to be powering your battery. Yeah. It's like, I don't get it.
And then, someone starts to say, EVs only exist to save the car industry. We need trains, buses, and pedestrian infrastructure to make any meaningful impact. Well, I mean, we tried that here at Edmonton, getting EV buses. They didn't work all that well in minus 40. So that was a bit of a boondoggle. So, some of these technologies, they sound good, but they're just not ready for prime time sometime, right? I don't know about you, but if I'm a trucker, driving down the Coquihalla in the middle of the winter, or up an ice road, it's like I'm not sure I want an EV. I don't think I'm gonna get where I'm going. I think I'm gonna run out of juice, right?
Well, you better have a diesel generator in the back so you can keep the batteries charged.
EV, right? So there's a time and a place, and sometimes they're convenient, right? Like I've rented an EV in Vancouver. It's pretty convenient because you're in downtown Vancouver. It's like you got to drive a ways to fill up gas. It's actually kind of inconvenient, but to plug in bring your car back to the hotel and have them plug it in, is it's kind of convenient, right?
But didn't you tell me that thing tried to kill you?
Yeah, I tried the self-driving. So this was a year or two ago, so maybe there's been some improvements, but I tried the self-driving, and I think it was trying to kill me. And I tried it a few times too, right? So I wanted to give it a fair shake, but it was clearly trying to kill me, so I had to take over from that. So, but the acceleration's kind of cool. That's kind of interesting, right? You're sitting there in a Model X Tesla. It's a relatively large SUV, and the thing just goes when you hit the gas, right?
When you hit the gas.
Gas, yeah. Still calling it gas, right? The accelerator, right?
The thing with me on that is there's no cool sound or rumble when it comes to, an EV. Yeah, they might have great torque and acceleration and whatnot, but there's not that, you feel like, you're gonna rattle out of your seat, and this thing is, a fire-breathing dragon that you're running down the road. You know what I mean? Like,
it's just the shrieking in my wife as she thinks we're gonna die from me using the self-driving component. That's the only cool sound. Her yelling at me, stop using that. Okay. So remember a stat: total energy consumption in British Columbia. If you converted all the energy sources, gas, diesel, bio, wood, natural gas to electric, you only need to build like 4 to 5 new sea dams. Yeah, it's a big project, right? They think it's going to happen with wind turbines overnight. Totally. I think some people get it. Some get it. Nova Scotia has the big 3 in Canada. Won't do anything about it, especially coal. That's true. That is.
What are
true.
the replies on that one?
The thing is, you do it to yourselves by historically making poor choices by voting. Hard to argue with that.
Yeah, very tough to argue with that.
It's hard to argue with that. The resources are there, and they're just not used, right? I mean, this whole podcast is about how do we help Canadians build wealth, but they have to understand that the base layer of the entire monetary system is energy. Mm-hmm. It really is energy, right? If Canada didn't exist, emissions would go down 1.6%, and the whole economy is based on consumption. If Nova Scotia became entirely efficient, their economy would collapse. It's kind of a catch-22. Yeah, that's. I mean, if you stopped using oil, coal, and natural gas, economic activity on planet Earth would cease to exist. There would be mass starvation overnight, right? It's just not a practical solution, right? So it's not something. It's not a switch that can be flipped off, right? And Elon Musk, the guy with the biggest electric car company on planet Earth, he's echoed as much. He knows it can't be shut off overnight, right? He knows it's if it's going to happen, it has to be a transition. Yeah, my whole family is liberal, and they cannot tell you why, other than the fact that it's etched into our brains as we are raised, because that's what their parents did. It's like, yeah,
that's a great reason to always vote Liberal, because that's what Grandpa did.
Yeah.
But, Liberals in the past are basically the Conservative Party today.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah.
Come on.
I mean, I see it. This is the comment. Me and you were talking about this before the podcast, right?
Oh, yes.
This is
little chummy jigger 69.
If we can't change the sources, I read this and it just totally boggles my mind that people actually think like this. It's like, we can't change the sources and we want to use more joules per capita. There is only one option: birth control. and that's what happening naturally now, except in Africa and Muslim states where women don't yet have the educational and rights we have elsewhere. If we have this mess with 8 billion, imagine 15 billion. We don't need disasters or war to get either, just education. It's like, okay, wow. Like, people actually think that the energy is so evil that we should stop procreating. It's like, so someone like this, imagine, Trevor, we're going to go home to our kids tonight and say, hey, kids, you guys are evil because Chummy Jigger 69 on the internet thinks that using the energy required to support, procreation is bad. It's like, where did we go so wrong that this opinion doesn't seem radical?
Well, it starts in the school system, because they're taught from a young age that, coal, oil, these types of energy things are going to kill the planet, destroy the planet. So it just infiltrates their mind. They go into these, indoctrination camps, and they're taught, 6-7 hours a day that everything they do is evil. They're bad. They're a happy accident from the universe. And then they grow up and they really believe these things because it's on the news. It's on all the media. It's on every movie, every bit of media out there that, energy is evil, oil is evil, and we have to switch to the greens. But really, it's a plot from sinister organizations like, I don't want to get blocked on YouTube, but some 3-letter organizations that aren't really down with us because they need to have this green Ponzi scheme.
I see it. It's just like fries my mind that someone actually thinks that that's not a radical position, that somehow depopulation is the answer. It's like, but they don't actually understand. It's like the entire Ponzi doesn't work without increasing population. Without more people coming into a Western country, the pension programs don't work. The healthcare system doesn't work. The entire fiat Ponzi doesn't work. It only works because you need more new people to come into the Ponzi than are leaving the Ponzi. It's all of our social systems as we know it. And with CPP here in Canada, it doesn't work. It's underfunded. They don't have your money. If people stop paying in overnight, they don't have your money. They haven't actually saved it.
Yeah.
It's an underfunded pension. So you need those. You need that. I don't think people actually understand how that works. But so we go beyond the craziness, beyond Chummy Jigger 69 who wants to depopulate the earth.
Depopulate everyone. Yeah. You first, brother. You first.
Yeah. Maybe it's good for him not to procreate. Maybe so. We need to transition away from fossil fuels, and can't stand it when I hate calling it that. Fossils, made up term. Fuels are minerals. Yeah, but they are. But it's like Santa Claus. I like calling them dead dinosaurs too. So I'm still gonna believe in dead dinosaurs, whether someone tells me they're minerals, just because.
Then why do we still find their bones everywhere?
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah. I have to go back 150 years to live without oils. Solar battery powers. This is true. This is absolutely true.
Yeah.
Right.
Absolutely.
Additional power sites and electric. Like anything that runs on electricity is not just generating the power. You have to have a distribution network, which we don't have. We can't distribute all of that on our electrical channels. Even if we had enough solar, enough wind, enough nuclear, and you could plug everything in, we don't have the infrastructure. It just doesn't exist that way. But so it's important for people to understand that this is the base layer of the economy. Nothing happens without energy. This is where the energy on planet Earth comes from. Okay, so then we move out from here. Okay, so let's look at the oil reserves by country. All right. And you can see we're comparing G7 to the BRICS. Saudi Arabia, way out in front, okay? This is in millions of barrels, okay? So this is 259 billion, okay? 259 billion of proven oil reserves. That doesn't mean that's all any of these countries have. These are just the proven oil reserves. And, proving more oil reserves, people are wondering, well, do they have more? This is all they have? It's like, that's not how it works. Once you've proven enough oil reserves, the cost to prove more, once you have enough oil reserves that are going to last you 50 or 100 years, it's like, why is someone going to spend the money to prove that there's more? What's the economic benefit? So there could be more in any of these countries, right? Especially the ones at the top. They have less, the Saudi Arabias, the Irans, the Canadas, the UAEs, who they just have so much more energy than they need themselves. It's like, why are the companies there going to spend the money to prove more reserves when we're talking about reserves that aren't going to get used in our lifetime? But Saudi Arabia, so far out in front at 259 billion, okay? And then Iran, 209, UAE 98, Russia 80, China 26, okay, Brazil 13, India 4, South Africa, not much,
not a whole lot,
not much at all, okay. So you get 689 billion proven barrels of oil reserves in the G7 countries. On the other hand, you have Canada at 170 billion. And you have the U.S. at only 48. We have to keep in mind that the U.S.'s population is 10 times the size of Canada, right?
Yeah.
Maybe 9 these days. Maybe it's getting closer to 9 with all the immigration lately. So,
immigration and air quotes.
So, ultimately, the G7 has less energy than the BRICS. We have less oil by a lot, right? By a lot. And I think most people don't actually understand oil, the type of oil that Saudi Arabia has. If someone wants to go down that rabbit hole, you could do a whole podcast on that. It's like how much light oil that they have in Saudi Arabia, most of that oil that you see there, most of that 259 billion is light crude oil that's easy to mine and refine. This is oil that can be produced at $10 a barrel. It's insane. You start looking at Saudi Arabia, that they can produce, they're producing 9 million barrels of oil a day. And most of it's produced by one company, Saudi Aramco. And 80% of that company is owned by the kingdom, by the royal family themselves. It's mind-boggling numbers when you start looking at it, that these guys are profiting. One family is profiting, $500 million to $1 billion every day. 365 days of the year, right? As opposed to energy in other countries, in Canada, where it's like we can't produce it at $10 a barrel. It's more like $50 a barrel, okay, to produce it, depending on the site, right? And a lot of people will look at that, and one of the common things like, well, but Venezuela has more. True, Venezuela has more, but it's a far different composition of oil that Venezuela has. Most of Venezuela's oil is heavy oil or offshore oil, okay? So it's the more expensive oil to produce. And, for all intents and purposes, if you look at heavy oil, so, the oil sands type of thing in Canada, or offshore oil, in general, they're in the same ballpark of what it costs to mine that oil. But, so if you can produce it at $50 a barrel, but that being said, onshore heavy oil is more cost effective because the costs are spread out over time. So offshore oil, what happens with offshore oil is, most of the costs are upfront. So even though it's $50 a barrel to produce it, you have to put all of these upfront costs, to put the site up there. So it's more heavily weighted to, you have to put those costs up front, okay? And so, generally speaking, every deposit's different. Every oil deposit site on planet Earth is slightly different, but generally speaking, heavy oil onshore is more cost effective to produce, even though it's the same nominal dollars, but the costs are more spread out over time. So the time value of money is generally cheaper onshore to produce, okay? And so when you look at that, it's like Venezuela is an absolute mess. Who wants to come in there and put a bunch of money down to mine offshore oil in Venezuela?
And in Venezuela, because of the socialist government there, it goes to the government. So they want the biggest piece of the pie. So it's de-incentivizing for any private company to go in there and want to mine there.
Yeah, and then their heavy oil too. Their heavy oil is generally at a greater depth than the heavy oil in Canada. Okay, so heavy oil in Canada, call it 400 meters down in the ground, and heavy oil in Venezuela, a lot of it's a kilometer to a kilometer and a half down in the ground, and it's not as consistent throughout the deposit. So it's actually more expensive to mine than Canadian heavy oil because it's further down the ground and the deposits aren't as consistent. Okay, and so everyone just talks about Venezuela being the energy superpower, but it's got two bad things happening. It's like it's a very challenging political system, and the oil that they have is not ideal, right? It's so at best case scenario, it's something that's going to be $50 a barrel type of thing to produce with a challenging government to contend with, as opposed to the royal family in Saudi is just pumping it out as much as they want, $10 a barrel. It's crazy when you look at it, like how much control that they have on that and how much they actually make. But I mean, that's the oil reserves, and the point of the matter is here, it's like we're at a disadvantage according to the BRICS countries. The BRICS countries have more energy than us. They really do. But Canada is a major player, like an absolute major player. Like we control more than half of the oil reserves of the entire G7, significant portion. And so when we look at that, it's like, it's a big deal. Okay. Moving on, the next one there, natural gas reserves by country. Russia, far out in front. Iran, 34,000, Saudi Arabia 9,000, China 6,000, total BRICS 127,000, and we just don't have as much in the G7. Like, we do not have as much in the G7. The U.S. number 1 at 17, Canada at 2. Now, I know a lot of people speculate that Canada has more, and it's probably correct, but most of that natural gas is north. It's north. In northern regions, that would be very costly to explore. Okay, so is there more? Probably. Is it in more expensive areas to get at? Yes, for sure. But I don't think we're going to run out in our lifetime. Even despite that number. So that's natural gas. Okay, looking a little wimpy. Canada does have more, I think, but not yet explored. I would agree with that sentiment. And a lot of it's in northern communities where it's logistically difficult to explore, and regulations prevent people from doing it. Okay. Then we get to coal. Okay, coal. Russia, China, India, South Africa. 477. We're going to go. This is 477,000, but it's measured in millions, so we'll go 477 billion again. And then we look at coal in the U.S. 254 billion. The entire EU at 11 billion. Canada at 7 billion. And so you start looking at these numbers again.
It's still a lot. Like that is a lot of coal that people are wanting to keep in the ground, except China, India, developing countries like that.
Yeah, they're not keeping that in the ground. They're gonna burn that coal, whether we burn the coal or not. They're gonna burn the coal, okay? Because the energy, independence for them, it really matters, right? Why should they use that energy? It's like I think I heard Jordan Peterson was having a debate with it was a Twitter tiff with some African leader online. He's like, well, why should you use that energy? It pollutes the environment. He's like, why you should use it is because it's cheap and because you're poor. It was a very kind of like a harsh statement, but it was very true. It's like, your people are poor and they deserve some energy. So, why should they use it? It's like
that entire continent would be completely changed if they were, allowed to use the energy that's available. But, we have these meddling countries and meddling powers that want to keep them poor. And I think that's horrible. And we could completely change the world by just letting them
keep them poor, or trying to convince stupid people not to have families, right? Because they just, because we're going to run out of energy, right?
Well, when you're in the dark because you got no energy, I mean, what else do you have to do but make babies?
Yeah.
I'm just saying.
Then we get to uranium, okay? And uranium, it's, Canada is way out in front. And when you start to look at how the energy grid operates, it's nuclear power is a very feasible option for people who actually, if you really wanted to reduce carbon emissions, it's like nuclear, the math starts to work. But when you start to look at like the options of like more solar, more wind, it's like, it doesn't have very dense power. It's like you need a lot of land area. There's a lot of other, materials and minerals that has to go into producing wind and solar panels. And then it doesn't have that, base load demand. If it's not windy, if the sun's not shining, it doesn't work.
Yeah.
But that's not how our energy needs happen. It's like we can't shut off the life support systems in the hospital just because it's, the wind's not blowing today or the sun's not shining, right? Yeah. Our energy needs don't work that way, right? But nuclear, it works, right?
Oh yeah, I'm a huge fan of nuclear energy. I mean, look at the abundance of uranium we have, and we could not only send that uranium to other places and create more nuclear, but the people who are claiming green, like the waste from that, that comes out of those big stacks is steam.
Yeah.
Steam. That's good for the environment, I think.
Yeah.
And, and it lasts a long time. Like it produces energy for a really long time. And they found ways to make the radiation virtually, harmless after a time. After they're spent, they can deal with the spent rod, the spent fuel. And those things will last for decades and decades. I think we need more nuclear power if that's where everybody wants to go. But the hypocrites want to use steel, copper, iron, all these things in order to make these solar panels and wind farms and take up all the agricultural land with massive farms and really harm the environment, but under the guise of saving the environment. It's ridiculous.
Yeah. We can replace all of our natural power plants with nuclear, but that's not a green conversation green lobbyists are willing to have. Yes, it's kind of funny. You start to look in Europe, and a lot of, some places in Europe have gone away from nuclear, and France has gone all into nuclear. And, the green lobbyists in France say it's okay in France, but it's not okay in the rest of Europe. It's like, but then when you drill into it, you start to see that a lot of French colonies in Africa produce nuclear. It's like, because they're getting paid. That's why the narrative is different in different countries. It's like, it's
so slimy.
It's so corrupt. It's like, I like this one. It's lovely. I guess we Canadians can refine a lot of those uranium and put into ICBM as deterrence. It's like, well, I think if a lot of countries on planet Earth weren't fighting over energy, we wouldn't need so many ICBMs. It's like, I think that's what a lot of the disputes are ultimately about. It's about, artificial restrictions on energy and people fighting over energy that's really actually quite abundant on planet Earth.
Yeah, I mean, everyone could have plenty of cheap, abundant energy. And, just imagine what the economies would be like if everyone is able to just focus on producing and not just, paying the enormous amounts for energy prices.
Yeah. I mean, I have to present the data according to derivative contracts. I'd caution this. People looking at derivatives and I'm not sure where they're going with that, but I see a lot of, ultimately we're tying this back to people, building wealth in Canada. It's like there's a lot of good energy companies in Canada. You don't have to play options or derivatives or leverage plays. It's like you could just, you can buy and hold a Suncor or CNRL and extract that dividend for the rest of your life. And that's a legitimate play, right, in Canada. So Canada should learn from those zero tax countries. Well, oddly enough, on this list, the zero tax countries, it's like, well, there's kind of only one. There's really only one zero tax country on that list. It's just the UAE, right? It's not like the entire BRICS is zero tax. For the most part, they almost all have tax, right? What makes you think that BRICS still exists? India is already making a move against China. I doubt that. I really doubt that. And yeah, I look at some of these, are still financially is in shambles. Are we in shambles? This is where, I don't actually think we are in shambles. It's like the topic is Canada an energy superpower? It's like it is. We're just a poorly managed superpower. That's it.
I can agree with that.
Canada really is an energy superpower. Like you just look at the reserves that we have of, every form of energy, and you compare it to our population base, and it's just like a ridiculous amount of riches. And so anybody who inherits this, whether it's Justin Trudeau or Pierre Poilievre, it's like I would argue it's a easier assignment than a Biden or a Trump has, or whoever replaces Biden maybe. Full court press on that one, I think, to get someone else on that ticket. But I would argue it's an easier assignment. It's like, okay, the U.S. dollar, it's easier to borrow money in the U.S., and it will be for the foreseeable future. But that's becoming less and less of an advantage. We're still going to need energy. As the world de-dollarizes, which is not something that's going to happen overnight, the world is still going to need energy, and Canada has a ridiculous amount of riches of energy. And will we become, Venezuela North? It's like, well, no, I don't think so. I don't think, just proximity to the U.S. We have a much closer proximity to the U.S. B, it's like, will we be that extreme in government? Probably not. That's not a likely outcome. And C, the energy deposits themselves are different. They're different. We just talked about them. Canadian heavy oil is cheaper to mine than Venezuelan heavy oil. It really is. It's structurally different. Okay, so it's not likely. Okay, we have that. I go further. We had an inflation print, 2.7%. We've seen it just kind of bouncing around. I think people get really excited when they see that 2.7%. But we had 2.7% in May, then it's back up to 2.9%, and then back down to 2.7%. And I think people need to zoom out from that. When I zoom out from that, it's like we haven't moved a lot since the beginning of the year. It looks like it's trending down, but very, very slowly on CPI. But I do always tie it back to oil. Okay, we do always tie it back to oil because energy affects the price of every single thing that we have. Okay. And you can start to see, just look at the trends. This is not a perfect correlation. It's not meant to be, but I just want people to understand. It's like generally when you see oil prices going up, you see these numbers going up too. Okay, when oil is going up, shown in red here, we see the CPI prints going up, also shown in red. When you see the green, it's like interesting how the green is grouped together, and the red is grouped together, and the green is grouped together, and so. If we woke up tomorrow and oil was $200 a barrel, inflation's going up, people. Yeah. And it doesn't matter if the central bank has their interest rate set at 0.25%. Like that's just the way the system is it inflationary?
Is it inflation like typical inflation where the government prints money, or is it just because the price of energy has gone up? Thus, the trickle-down effect of everything else just becoming more expensive comes in. Is it true inflation, or is it just price changing? Like, because governments control the inflation, or central banks control the inflation by printing money and so forth. So maybe differentiate that a little bit.
It will drive the prices up. I hate to use the word trickle down because it's like a term that someone coined that somehow they think right-leaning conservatives think that trickle down economics works, but no one has actually ever said that. No economist worth salt has ever actually said trickle down. It's a misunderstanding of how economic systems work. But the price will go up. The price of goods and services go up if energy is more expensive. That's just how it is. Irrespective of if you have a lot of extra money in the system or more money being injected into the system. Obviously, if energy prices are going up and there's more money being printed, it's going to be more pronounced. But just the energy prices going up is going to have an effect. And I've been looking very carefully at the oil inventory history, and I track it both on a 24-month basis, and we can see it's like we start with 896, and we can see the inventory numbers decreasing. Okay, finishing at 821, and I've also been looking at on a 24-year history. I think that's very important. You start to see 837 million barrels of oil. This is a U.S. number, by the way. 837 million barrels of oil. Decreasing here to 821. We got as low as 799. There's been a bit of a bump up recently, okay, which is, my concern has been that because of the, quote, green energy transition, it's that there's not been enough oil and gas capital expenditures in conventional energy systems, and we're, potentially pushing ourselves to an artificial energy crunch. Even though we have tons of reserves, that oil and gas companies, they've been hesitant to invest in new production capacity because they're just worried about the political environment. They don't know if they can get a pipeline built. And myself as a shareholder in some of these companies, I get it. Like, why would you spend the money on the capital expenditures if you don't know if it's going to increase the bottom line? But as a citizen, as a parent, I just worried like one day, like I don't want to wake up, tomorrow to $200 a barrel oil. The quality of life for people does not go up if energy is more expensive. It goes down.
Yeah, and that's when, people are chopping down trees and burning wood and coal and whatever they can find for heat. Yeah. We're in Canada. Like we need heat, or otherwise we die.
Yeah.
There's no other option.
And so ultimately, like, we have this, and we've shown everyone the numbers here, and this is where we should take some confidence in these numbers, because we see how poorly things are run, and a lot of people focus on it, and it's the fear porn, and it works very well online. But at the end of the day, it's just there's a ridiculous amount of riches in Canada in terms of energy and resources, and it can survive a tremendous amount of mismanagement. And so, do I think Justin Trudeau is a better manager than Joe Biden? No, I think they're both equally inept. It's just Justin Trudeau had a better hand than Joe Biden. And that's you start to just look at what the capacity is. It's like we're always only a decade away from really ramping up energy production in this country to basically dig our way out of a hole. And I don't think the sheer numbers that you see is that the U.S. is not in that position. They don't have the same resources per person. It's a harder assignment. They've relied very heavily on their ability to export dollars. And I don't think that is going to be a good strategy looking 10, 20, 30 years out. I really think this, we're headed to a point in history where you're going to have the countries that have resources, the ones that don't have resources. Okay, and people will say about the U.S.'s military strength. It's like the U.S. is now spending more money on interest than they are on military. Right now, today, they're spending more money on interest to service their debt than they are spending on military. It's like that's not a sustainable position, right?
Yeah. If this was a household, if the U.S. was a household, we'd be chopping up the credit cards. You're bankrupt. You're done.
Yeah.
But they're still spending like
and so when people see this, it's like what I don't want is I don't want people on the sidelines, because ultimately we talk is like, how do you escape this this inflationary trap? Is you have to trade the fake money. We have it all the time here. We have the fake money just sitting on the desk. The 20 billion Zimbabwe dollars that I keep here, the fake money, and I have the real money, the gold coin. It sits on the desk because I want to have it in front of me on every single client meeting, because the goal is to trade the fake paper money for real assets. And too many people stay on the sidelines for too long because they're scared, when really the scariest thing is the paper. Like, the scariest thing is the paper.
That's what gets inflated away.
Buying Canadian real estate, buying, good quality Canadian dividend paying stocks, buying gold, buying Bitcoin, especially if you start to understand that the world runs on energy. And the reason why gold and Bitcoin are likely to continue forth is because they're very energy. You require a lot of energy to produce both.
Yes.
Gold is 80 times more expensive than silver, but it also requires 80 times more energy. So every time someone actually thinks that, the gold silver ratio is going to come back to, a historical norm, it's like, probably not, because it actually requires 80 times more energy. And there's your differential. And you start to look long-term out. It's like the gold to silver ratio. It's been increasing not over 50 years. It's been increasing over 500 years. So, will it normalize? Like, I don't think so. Could it normalize a bit? Maybe. But is it going back to, a 40 or a 50 long-term? I don't, the probability of that isn't high, right? And this is essentially a way, you can't fake this. So it becomes a way to actually store energy. Bitcoin requires a lot of energy to produce, and most people realize it's like, it's stranded energy, people. Most of the Bitcoin, most of the energy being used for Bitcoin is energy that otherwise would just be not used. Okay. It's not like it's getting stored. It would be stored in a battery somewhere, and they would shut down that power plant. It's like that's not how it works, actually. And so, we have to, when we look at this, I want people to have the confidence that they have to understand that the sky is not falling. Okay, Canada has a good hand to play, and you could have a crazy government elected for 4 years or 8 years, but ultimately the end of the end goal for you and your family is to acquire assets that will outperform the inevitable inflation.
Outperform the crazy. And, when it comes to energy and whatnot, so if you're investing in Canadian dividend paying stocks that are energy stocks, that will help be a hedge, I guess, against the inflating away of the dollars.
Yeah. So, I mean, if you're looking out there, it's like if you're standing on the sidelines, the action item here is like, don't be on the sidelines, okay? Because there is, there's no any perfect entry or exit point. What I want you to do is get off the sidelines. You need to start that business. You need to buy that real estate. You need to, invest in good quality stocks, buy some gold, buy some Bitcoin. Don't overextend yourself, okay? In doing so, have good liquidity ratios, but have the confidence to know that the sky isn't falling, because the wealth of riches that we have here could survive another crazy regime. And ultimately, we're only ever a few years away in this country to really digging our way out of it, so to speak.
Yeah, and that's a good way to end this section of the podcast. So sign us out. So guys, thank you so much for joining us today on this podcast. Is Canada an energy superpower? I believe it is. And we will see you on the next podcast. And if you haven't yet got your ticket to our Beat the Odds at Money and Wealth in Canada, definitely check out spurrell.ca and get your tickets now.